George, the first question I want to ask you is about your association with the University of Michigan. You actually attended Michigan for a year.
Well, Mike, I did actually. My high school football coach at Flint Central, Howard Auer, was a Michigan man. He was blue from the day he was born, I'm sure. And upon graduation, he steered me in that direction. And my first year of football was played on the freshman team at the University of Michigan. The war came along. As a matter of fact, the war was in progress at that time, as you may remember, in 1942, and the draft board was breathing down my neck. So I had to do something about getting into the service that I wanted to get into. That was the Air Force. And I promptly enlisted in the Army Air Force at that time and became a navigator on B-17 bomber and flew my missions over in North Africa and Italy during the war.
As that series started to heat up, the Michigan game must have meant quite a bit to you.
Well, it really did. And of course, it's a great series between those two schools, particularly in our first year when Biggie came on board in 1947. Biggie had coached at Michigan under Fritz Chrysler, and we all wanted to win this game very badly. And as you may recall, we lost that game very badly by a score of 55-0. I can tell you this, that it made men out of us boys in an awful hurry. The locker room facilities at that time were flooded, and at the risk of being using something that I shouldn't, I could say that the sewers backed up in the locker room, and this was before the football game, and it was during halftime, and it caused a great deal of havoc in our locker room and a great deal of depression. And I might add that after that game, as you know, we got beat by an excellent football team, 55-0. Biggie stood up on the locker room bench with tears in his eyes, and he vowed that we would never go through this again, that we would never be humiliated like this again while he was a football coach, and that never did happen.
Quite a man, and you've told me a couple of stories. Just relay those to me again.
Well, Biggie was a great technician. He was a great motivator. I think Biggie's success was in not trying to cram his talent into a particular system. I think Biggie's success came from looking at his talent and developing a football system around his talent. For example, he developed, you may recall, the multiple offense system, and this was at a later time used by many successful football coaches around the nation. For example, he would have a good quick kicker on his team, and he'd develop a whole series of plays around his quick kicker. It'd be a quick kick, a fake quick kick and run, fake quick kick pass, and fake quick kick run and handoff, and he'd have a whole series of plays. So Biggie's success, I think, number one, came from molding his system around his available talent. And then Biggie really was a great motivator. At some times during halftime in the locker room, we might be behind or it might be a close game. He'd stand up there like Knute Rockne, and many of us were GIs at that time, had gone through the war, and sometimes that business would begin to roll off our backs, but we wanted to believe the man. He was so sincere, and I think Biggie, really, his success was in his ability to motivate his players beyond the talent they had sometimes.
One of your finest moments was at Penn State. The coach at the time called it one of the greatest single-man performances that he'd ever seen. You remember any details about that game?
I can recall the first time we played Penn State was in 1946 when Charlie Bachman was the coach, and we played out there at State College, Pennsylvania. I'll never forget the field at that time because with my small stature of 5'5.5", 157 pounds, I had a little difficulty seeing from one sideline to the other. For those of us who remember that field, it was humped in the middle. It was a grass field, old Beaver Field, and they had a big hump in the middle. So if a little guy like myself would stand at one sideline, he'd have a little difficulty seeing the other sideline. But perhaps that became somewhat successful for me because I was able to maybe run down the sideline without anybody seeing me. But that was one of our good games, and as I recall, we won 19-16, and the next game was in 1948. That was a tie game, 21-21, and I think one of my greatest thrills at that time was having a pass back 100 yards, but as you may recall, that pass was called back because of a clip down in the 15 to 20 yard line by Albie Booth, who was the referee at that time, former quarterback at Yale, called that play and called that penalty on John Yaka, and John was, it certainly wasn't a clip, at least the movies indicated that.